Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us for today's edition of Ecosystem Talks. I'm Sherrod Davis. I'm the CEO at Ecomap Technologies, and thrilled to be here with a good friend, one of the leaders of the Baltimore technology ecosystem, Corey Bailey. He's the newly appointed CEO of Upsurge Baltimore. Corey, welcome. Thanks for being on with us. Really appreciate it.
Sherrod, it's my pleasure. Great to be on.
We're going to talk today about building from blueprint to reality, building Equitech cities through ecosystem development. I want to start, Corey, by better understanding how you became an ecosystem builder. I know your background, but I think the audience would be really fascinated how a former professional football player ends up being an ecosystem builder.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I appreciate it. I did not know the term ecosystem building until about 3 years ago. And what I'll say is I have always been a great communicator. I've got my degree in communication studies. I've always been very curious about other people. And I'm an extrovert, so I'm always out there sort of in the public eye and building relationships for myself, for others, connecting people when it makes sense. So I've been doing that my whole life, being a communicator, a connector. And the term ecosystem building was new to me 3 years ago. And someone that we all know and love, our friend Pavel Lepere, sat me down for about 2 hours to explain it in depth to me. And she said, "You, my friend, are not just a talented relationship builder. You are an ecosystem builder. Embrace it, lean into it, and make it your life's work." So here I am.
Amazing. What is Equitech, Corey?
That's another great question. Equitech it's our aspiration. It's a term that has been born in Baltimore. It started at the inception of Upsurge, but it's our aspiration to build a thriving tech city and a new model for American innovation. Too often, tech cities have grown, leaving certain people out. And we believe that in Baltimore, all of the talent, resources, and assets exist to build the world's first Equitech city. And that's our aspiration. And we believe Equitech is built on the strength of diverse leaders, equitable standards and practices, and a culture of belonging in tech. So we believe that, and that's our vision at Upsurge, is for Baltimore to be recognized as the first Equitech city in the world.
And why is it important for Baltimore specifically? What I'm tugging on a little bit, Corey, is the concept of leveraging the assets that exist within an ecosystem to chart a path to making this blueprint become a reality, right? It starts by, I think, first recognizing what are the assets exist. You guys have clearly recognized that one of the assets that's unique to Baltimore is its diversity. Can you just talk a little bit more about like why Equitech specifically is important primarily for a city like Baltimore?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you sort of nailed it. Like Baltimore has this rich history. It's so uniquely placed in American history and American geography, in the current state of the world. There is such a unique blend of immigrant, free Black, migrant through the Great Migration. It's sort of like a border, state, sort of the northernmost state in the south of the Mason-Dixon, right? Like there's just so many things that come together here in Baltimore that make up the story and the culture and the history of Baltimore, that we can't grow our tech economy any other way than to recognize the contributions that everyone that is from here, that is of here, and that loves here can make to growing our tech ecosystem. So the concept of Equitech is an aspiration that everyone should want to be a part of. Whether you're a white male founder, you bring in a company here, or you're growing your company from East and West Baltimore, we feel like that there is such a rich diversity of talent, assets, and resources that exist here that are unique to this place, and that other cities will have their own unique sort of story, history, and assets to leverage as well. But Equitech is that concept that you use all of that, you take all of that and build your tech economy from there. So we believe Baltimore can be a model for that for the rest of the country and the world. And we intend to prove that theory to be true over the course of the next decade.
And one of the things that I often hear from ecosystem builders is around measuring success and what success looks like. I think Upsurge Baltimore is well positioned somewhat uniquely in that they have a clear vision around Equitech. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how will you know that that vision has come to fruition? How will you know that that mission has been accomplished? Are there certain measures that you all are looking at on a regular basis to say, okay, Equitech is making really significant progress?
Yeah, and I would say that we are working towards that for sure. This is clearly something that has never been done before, to prove that you can create a thriving tech ecosystem, one that is as diverse and as rich as we intend to make it. I would say success for us looks like a thriving tech ecosystem. It looks like more enterprises with great paying jobs. It looks like a more diverse set of leaders in our ecosystem. It looks like a healthy tax base with local and state government that can be visionary, that can be forward thinking. It looks like safer and healthier neighborhoods. It looks like more opportunity, not just in the white L, but in the black butterfly, right? It looks like, pathways and opportunities for young people to get into the innovation economy being very apparent and sort of the standard for which we encourage our young people to get into. And I'll say this, we've been undergoing a pretty intense process for measuring those standards and practices. I will say that what we specialize in at Upsurge is culture change. It is collaboration. It is connectivity. And those things are hard to measure. And so for us, we do want to have sort of a model that we can put in place to show here's where we started on this journey. Here's where we are now. Here's where we are headed. And we have a thesis behind why we are making some of the decisions that we are based on the data that we're seeing in the number of diverse leaders being connected to more access to capital along the capital stack, more talent finding their way into organizations earlier, more customers and corporate partners engaging with startups and founders at an earlier stage. So we do have a sort of a set of metrics that we are working towards, but we've got to put the model together to show how we are impacting that for sure.
And will you just talk a little bit about the blueprint itself? Like, I know that you've been with Upsurge since almost the very beginning, and we can talk a little bit about that origin story. But when you guys were charting this out, quite literally, what were the things that were written down? What were the pillars you all wanted to stand on? I think that that would be really helpful, especially for ecosystem builders that are either pivoting their focus, developing a new blueprint, or trying to activate one that they've already come up with.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question, Sherrod, and I'll give you sort of a try to not make my answer as long, but when we came into Baltimore's tech ecosystem, there were a lot of different factors that existed then that don't now. GBC was sort of dormant at the time. ETC was sort of figuring out what to do coming out of the pandemic. So there were a lot of organizations that were well known in our ecosystem that weren't necessarily serving the same purpose that they did before. And so it was a bit of a struggle for us to sort of find our lane in ecosystem building. I think we played part of the role of an entrepreneur support organization. How can we support founders and connect them to potential investment and customers? We played part the role of a economic development organization. how do we increase the full activity and spectrum of entrepreneurship and growth and job creation. And all along, here's what we were doing. We were building community. We were building connectivity. We were shifting culture and the mindset of the ecosystem towards what makes a great startup founder, what makes a great startup, what do they need to build and grow. And so I think over time, we have sort of been able to narrow our focus into ecosystem building. And so the blueprint for us is like, how do we scale the connectivity and strengthen the culture of our ecosystem in a way that's measurable, in a way that includes other partners and other stakeholders. So I'll say, like, at the beginning, our pillars were like startups and founders, access to capital, pathways into technology, marketing and storytelling for the tech ecosystem. How do we build pathways for people to prosper in place, right? What is the workforce component of that? And so there's like this broad spectrum that we came into the ecosystem with. And now we've narrowed it on how can we professionalize collaboration across the ecosystem and mobilize the entire ecosystem around startups and leaders of those startups, right? Brad Feld in the Startup Community Way talks about leaders, feeders, and instigators. The leaders of our ecosystem are those founders. They have to be. They're the ones taking the risks, they're the ones building the teams, they're the ones creating the jobs. The feeders are everyone who sort of pours into those founders and companies. So your investors, your ESOs, and then you need instigators. You need folks that are constantly bringing folks together and causing those collisions in a smart way to happen. And so Upsurge serves as one of those instigators to make sure that we're creating access and opportunity for people to engage in the tech ecosystem, generating more activity, and then sort of creating a culture and behavior of accountability across it for people to be able to engage. So I would say that, like, our blueprint right now is, how do we open the gates, as our friend Paolo Gregory of Cojado says? How do we open the gates for folks to be involved in the tech ecosystem? How do we create more activity and route them to the right resources and people at the right time? And then how do we create this culture of accountability where people are really highly engaged and activating their talents and resources to the best of their ability to support founders and startup growth?
Amazing. And now I want to get a little bit more tactical, Corey. Like, I think we have a good sense for the strategy, the blueprint, but I know just from working with you that you all made a series of specific decisions to activate the blueprint in some ways. I'm thinking of bringing an accelerator to Baltimore. I'm thinking of Equitech Tuesday. I'm thinking of Be More Tech Connect, right? Can you just talk about some of the tactical decisions that were made in service of the blueprint, how they're going and the direction they're heading in, why they're important?
Yeah, I think it's important, like you said, for us to have the full landscape of the tech ecosystem. And for us, we define our ecosystem as the Baltimore MSA, the Baltimore Metropolitan Statistical Area. That aligns with some of the work that's being done with the Tech Hubs, EDA Tech Hubs proposal. But we want our impact to be in Baltimore City. We believe that Baltimore City is the anchor of that hub, and is where we want our impact to be mostly felt, in the neighborhoods and sort of different geographies around Baltimore City. And so what I'll say is, first, we have to have the understanding of the full landscape. Second, we have to know what activities can happen to really accelerate or catalyze startup growth, what assets are missing or maybe could be additive to the ecosystem. Can we bring those here? Can we have that happen? You mentioned Techstars. We're getting ready to have the third cohort of the Techstars Equitech Accelerator. It's been a great megaphone for Baltimore Tech, and given some local companies and some companies coming from outside of our region an opportunity to experience what it's like to build in Baltimore and to get really networked in Baltimore, and expose the leaders and the folks that can influence startup growth in our ecosystem to companies that are at that investable, at that venture backable stage, so that they can grow in Baltimore. Be More Tech Connect came directly out of our work in year one with Upsurge teams. One of the sort of most rewarding, I think, experiences that we had early on was bringing over 200 folks that care about and are in Baltimore and are active in the ecosystem around different opportunities to create startup growth and activity. And one of the biggest recommendations was a platform that could give us a way to give people insight into who was in our ecosystem, what resources were available, and how they could access them. And so Be More Tech Connect in partnership with Fearless is something that we stood up. And there are other eco maps across our ecosystem now that we're engaged with and hopefully connecting to create a more full picture and landscape of the entrepreneurship journey in Baltimore. And then other things like, Black Tech Saturdays and Afrotech, happy hours and other things that we want our ecosystem to experience, to have access and opportunity to engage in meaningful ways in the ecosystem. And I'll just say this further, like our sort of 2024 goals and some of the things that we're working on this year. We have Uprise, which is our integrated startup advancement network that we're going to be partnering with, CBL and Loyola and all of our other ESO partners to create this integrated startup advancement network for early stage companies. We have worked with Future Enterprises where we've identified some companies like EcoMap that are scaling and hiring and how we can engage them with our investment community, with our corporate community, with procurement folks and sort of get them to the next horizon or the next milestone for their growth. And then we've got mobilization work like we're doing around EDA Tech Hubs and working with the consortium to put together a phenomenal phase 2 proposal that we think can really accelerate the growth of our ecosystem in Baltimore. And then we're looking for partners to work with to really do some more storytelling and marketing of the Baltimore tech ecosystem. We'll do that in partnership with GBC, with Visit Baltimore, Baltimore Homecoming, and other organizations to tell a more cohesive story about the positive things happening in Baltimore. First and foremost, for us being what's the momentum that's really happening in the tech space.
Amazing. When you took over this role, or I should say prior to this role, you were originally the chief relationship officer, if I remember correctly. Then
Yep.
you transitioned to chief ecosystem officer, and now you're the CEO. Talk a little bit, Corey, about how the transition's been, A. And then B, I also think it'd be helpful for this audience to better understand why the decision was made in the first place to have a chief relationship officer transition to a chief ecosystem officer. That isn't necessarily a role that we see all the time, but how did that help position Upsurge to get to the point where it is today?
Yeah, so first I'll say the transition has been amazing. I've had amazing support from our board chair, Mike Hankin, Chrissy Weiskell, our co-chair, Jeff Cherry, who's been a mentor of mine this entire time, has leaned in even more to sort of help me through the transition. And first and foremost, our COO, Maddie Stokes. We make a great team. She is my partner in Equitech. I always say that. And she has been vital and essential to making this transition smooth and I think the most impactful that it could be. I also want to give complete honor and respect to Jamie McDonald, our founding CEO. I don't think that I could have gotten the baton passed from a more passionate person about this mission and about this organization. And she really did do phenomenal work in the first 2.5 to 3 years of really setting up this organization to be successful in a way that I don't think anyone else could have done because of her experience in Baltimore and her passion for the startup community. For me, being first director of relationship development, I think it was seen as more of sort of a business development role, right? There was a lot of discovery, a lot of working directly with founders, with investors, making useful connections. And that gave me really clear insight into the needs of a lot of founders. And from different perspectives, I think did a really good job of building trust amongst founders, amongst the investment community, and in the ecosystem at large, as someone who just wanted to be a catalyst for positive change and for support and help for advancing founders in their journey and their companies. Transitioning to Chief Ecosystem and Relationship Officer um, really gave me an opportunity to engage more broadly with different stakeholders. Started to meet with city and state government leaders, started to meet with more corporate leaders to really understand on the other side of it what the opportunities to advocate for our startup community are through legislation, through incentives, through opportunities to engage with local and state government. And then with our corporate partners, what are they looking for when they're sourcing technologies or going through a procurement process? What are the barriers that they have to having a more diverse supplier network and being able to, really leverage the innovation economy locally and sort of source some of that technology and need here first and foremost. And so using all of those experiences and sort of having a full understanding of the entire landscape of the tech ecosystem in Baltimore, for me, it was just a natural progression into the CEO role and being able to have more of a full vision of what we could accomplish if we can scale that network and sort of create more leverage, more ambassadors, and more leverage more of the big nodes in our ecosystem around some of the work that we're doing instead of just tactically trying to do it all ourselves, really creating a network, an integrated network, a collaborative framework for how we can grow this ecosystem instead of it being sort of one organization responsible for that. How do we leverage what everyone does really well to create this network? And I'm really excited. I think ecosystem building is the way for a tech ecosystem to scale. It leverages the talent and expertise of every one of our stakeholder groups, our entrepreneur support organizations, our investment community, our corporate partners to really grow the tech ecosystem. And I'm excited to sort of put some of that learning that we've had over the first 3 years into the work of ecosystem building.
What's been the most challenging thing so far in the new role?
Just capacity. I mean, I think a lot of things have come naturally in terms of leading the team, board management, and engaging with our board and sort of leveraging them as a resource. You know, we've done so well at hiring talented individuals that have the entrepreneurial mindset that sometimes they move on. We just had a really talented program analyst, Naomi Winston, who has taken the step to be a solo founder now, and go off on her founder journey. So, we're looking to add folks to the team so that we can really capitalize on the momentum that we've created over the first 3 years. So the challenge for me now is sort of stepping into the role of team leader, of ecosystem leader, and really building the capacity of our team to go after some of the OKRs and milestones that we've set for ourselves and goals that we've set for ourselves this year.
I'm a I'm a new ecosystem builder, Corey, and I'm recognizing that our ecosystem is growing, it's moving in the right direction, but yet there are groups that are underrepresented that are not reflected well in our growing ecosystem. What advice would you give an ecosystem builder facing specific challenges around diversity, equity, inclusion, engaging underrepresented groups, or as you all call them, underestimated founders? Like what would be some of the things you would advise an ecosystem builder to focus on or look at that might be facing some of those challenges?
Yeah, I would start by just saying like it's important to acknowledge that that there are challenges for certain demographics, for certain subsets of founders. The numbers don't lie, as they say, right? 95% of venture funding goes to white males, white male-led companies, and less than 5% goes to women and people of color, while that demographic makes up 70% of the US population. And I always say this, like it's important to acknowledge that there's no way that 95% of the great ideas don't come from somewhere in that 70% of women and people of color. And so you've got to be very intentional about saying that you're going to find the talent, find the great ideas, find the opportunities for those companies to scale, and then have intentional strategies around how you can produce better outcomes for Black founders, for women founders, for other, what we call underestimated founders and leaders. And the other thing to acknowledge is that you won't have all the answers. Those groups that are experiencing those challenges are organizing, they're communicating with each other, they understand the challenges that they face and where the opportunities exist. And so it's important to lean in with them, to listen, and to support and amplify strategies that they're employing that are already working for them, and seeing how you can scale them even bigger or to even wider audiences outside of sort of who's the initial support for them. So for us, that means listening to our women leaders when they have important feedback to share, leaning in with our Black founders, and especially our Black female founders who are sort of in that double underrepresented and underinvested demographic, and sort of understand first the challenges, acknowledge them, and then try to support helpful activities that are already happening in the ecosystem, and amplifying those, and then introducing some with whatever resources that you have, whether that's human capital, financial capital to support, just leaning into some of those resources that can help create better outcomes for those groups.
I'm pretty sure, Corey, that you were that Equitech Tuesday was your brainchild. Correct me if I'm wrong. Can you talk more about what that is and why it's important to the Equitech mission?
Yeah, well, you're doing me too much credit to call it a brainchild. It's just sort of a happy accident, if you will. The origin of Equitech Tuesday, when we started this work, it was full pandemic. So most of the people that I was meeting in this ecosystem were in these squares that we're on right now. And it's a great opportunity to meet a lot of people very quickly, but it doesn't help you create depth in those relationships. It doesn't help you sort of understand the full experience of that human, of that person. You get a sense of who they are as a founder or who they are as an investor, but not necessarily who they are as a person. And so every Tuesday I was doing my Zoom calls from Alma Cocina, which is my neighbor's restaurant, my work from home, if you will, at the time. And so I would invite people that I was meeting during the days and during the calls to just come have a drink at the bar, get to know each other a little bit better. And after a couple of weeks, it grew from 4 to 6, 6 to 8. We then had our very first AMA at Impact Hub. And after that, a lot of people that were there walked down. And for all intents and purposes, that was the first official Equitech Tuesday, if you will, where we had a density of folks that were really leading in their different areas and perspectives across the tech landscape to get to know each other. And so every Tuesday since then, we have been meeting at one place or another, and you'll find investors, you'll find founders, you'll find students in tech talent, you'll find government leaders and artists and people who really care about the future of Baltimore and are really interested in how innovation in tech plays a role in that. And from an ecosystem building standpoint, it's important to have regular convenings, regular opportunities for people to both be introduced to the tech landscape and to get that depth with different relationships across the ecosystem. And Equitech Tuesday provides that opportunity, that front door, if you will, for people to engage. But it's also important to have smaller, more intimate opportunities for people to gather as well. So, Sharad, you've been part of these. We've done sort of family dinners, if you will, at different people's houses to introduce founders to different big nodes across the ecosystem. We do something called startup strategy sessions, where we invite 3 founders to sit across from 5 or 6 investors and advisors to talk through a business opportunity or challenge. We've done convergence, where we've brought the corporate community, some of like the top 40 corporations and institutions in to hear from leaders in the innovation space in the tech economy, to talk about the opportunity to engage with that. So it's important, those regular convenings, and Equitech Tuesday is really just a come one, come all opportunity for if you're even tech interested to come in and engage in the tech ecosystem.
I want to back up to something that you mentioned earlier, Corey, which were the upsurge teams. Moving a little bit back towards some of the blueprint conversation. Talk about the genesis of that idea, and then talk a little bit more about how it came together. And I'm particularly interested in the themes that drove the conversations that produced some of the pillars that you mentioned today, because that's a strategy that I think is really interesting and seemingly was really impactful for the future of Upsurge.
Yeah, it was, and giving full credit of that concept and that idea to Jamie McDonald, our original CEO. It's incumbent on ecosystem building organizations that are lean, that don't have 20-person teams, to be able to leverage the collective intelligence and feedback of the community to guide the work. And as a brand new organization, we were having tons of Zoom calls with founders, investors. We met with community leaders, we met with faith leaders, we met with business and government leaders. But some of the best feedback and ideas were coming from the people who are already on the ground doing the work and operating in our tech ecosystem. And so the Upsurge Teams process was, how do we create groups that could give feedback on different tech sectors, like cybersecurity, like life sciences and healthcare, like education tech. How can we create teams that across those sectors to give us feedback on what they're seeing as the opportunities and challenges? And then what activities do we need to get intelligence from our community from around inclusive entrepreneurship, pathways into tech jobs. So I think there were originally 18 Upsurge teams. One that even came about that we didn't think of was created by a couple of the veterans in our community. Like what can veterans or in entrepreneurship, the intelligence community, how can we leverage our strong veterans groups to think about how they engage in the tech economy? So across those 18 teams, they really delivered what were short-term sort of systems change midterm and moonshot long-term ideas that we could be working on. I think it was just a really good process to go through because it got over 200 people familiar with each other right away to sort of start to create that relationship and that shared mission, if you will. People were putting on their LinkedIn's like, I'm an Upsurge team member or I'm an Upsurge ambassador. It's something that I feel like if we were a more mature organization, we could have leveraged a little bit better, even coming out of that process. But essentially, that's something that we need to do moving forward is how do we leverage the connectivity, the shared mission, and people who are active participants in our tech ecosystem. How can we leverage them as nodes to carry forth the work that is required and the activities and behaviors that are required to create an Equitech city? And so we intend on doing more of that collaborative mobilization work moving into the future.
Amazing. Moving to a question that we got in the chat, Corey. This is from Tim, actually in Washington. Curious about contracting and procurement strategies that you're deploying to grow business revenues for historically underestimated entrepreneurs.
Yeah, great question, Tim. And I'll sort of cite two pilots that we did. One that worked relatively well, one that didn't, and that we need to iterate on. We brought a group of founders and companies to Johns Hopkins Health System. They have a mandate that they call Be More Local, and they want to be able to source more local procurement and more suppliers in their health system. We brought them technology companies. We even brought them some scaling sort of CTG companies as well. And that worked well because we had a committed partner there in George Labdis, who is the sort of head of supplier diversity and procurement. And he was able to activate all of the resources and other important contributors within Johns Hopkins Health System to make sure that they were doing diligence on the right products, the right services, the right technologies. Some of those led to contracts, some of those led to great feedback. What we hear from founders is just going through that process is valuable. A no with great feedback is almost as good as a yes because it does help with great customer feedback. So this is why we made the decision not to contract. This is what we might need in order to contract in the future. And then conversely, we brought a group of founders in front of Capital One to meet with some of the folks on their team to think about how they could engage and connect them within their organization. And what we learned there is that there's a lot of moving pieces. There was some org restructuring that was happening. And so the timing wasn't necessarily perfect to be able to get more companies down that procurement pathway or down that pilot pathway with Capital One. But in both cases, we've learned a lot. We've learned what works. We've learned what challenges might exist. And now in the Tech Hubs Phase 2 proposal that we're introducing as part of our EDA opportunity to get a Phase 2 designation for Tech Hubs, we're talking about getting commitments from corporate partners where they will have the mandate from C-suite leadership that engaging with our startup community is important. They will nominate or have a dedicated resource on their team who is the conduit to Baltimore Tech, and B, that they'll engage in some of the activities that we'll be introducing, like our startup strategy sessions, like some of the showcases that we want to put together to introduce more founders and companies to our corporate community. So it takes commitment, it takes activity and engagement, and it takes just some dedicated resources within those corporate organizations that they know that it's important to engage with the startup community. So we're learning as we go, Tim, as well, and hopefully by this time next year, if that same question is asked, we'll have even better answer for you.
I recognize that a big part of your job is really connecting the dots throughout the ecosystem. I think where Baltimore has gotten a lot of value from you and from Upsurge is founders being able to get founders into spaces with JHU, with Capital One, with the governor, et cetera. Can you talk about what strategies you've used to be able to do that, right? If I'm an ecosystem builder in Washington or in Dallas, Texas, right, I may not have those connections initially, but what did you all do at Upsurge to sort of facilitate those opportunities for the founders and the entrepreneurs that you're supporting?
Yeah, I think, Sherrod, it starts with trust and credibility. The first thing we had to do was build trust across the ecosystem that we were here to support, startup growth and founders in their journeys, and then have credibility that we have the full landscape and picture of what's going on, not just in our tech ecosystem, but across the country, to have a good perspective on how Baltimore can win and how the founders in our ecosystem can win. So what I'll say is it starts with that building that trust with our founders and the startup community, and having that credibility as a trusted resource for data, for information, and sort of for the full picture of the landscape. And then it takes real dedicated activity, both from a grassroots level all the way up to sort of like your higher levels of corporate engagement and government. It takes those founder dinners and people that are willing to meet you for a beer and have a coffee, or come to an Equitech Tuesday where it's really low to no pressure, and every level of the sort of economic landscape is there to engage. And it takes a willingness to sort of get people down to the State House in Annapolis and in front of legislators and in front of people who can really impact them from a legislative or a civic standpoint as well. So I would just say, it shouldn't be the job of one organization. It should be the job of the entire community to be doing that. And you have to value participation, people who are willing to sort of participate in that way. and then leverage those nodes of people who have raised their hand to say like, yes, if you're doing a tech tour for people who are interested in Baltimore tech, come by our space, talk with our leadership, talk to the people who run our programs. If you're doing a showcase, I want to sit on that panel and talk about my experience, as an underrepresented VC. If you're doing a startup strategy session, bring me in. I've got some great stories and experience with working with companies with go to market. And that seems to be what the founders that you're bringing in for the session need. So it takes participation. It starts with trust and it starts with credibility. But I will say, like to quote my mentor Marty Gray with Stanley Black and Decker, it takes relentless incrementalism. You have to be willing to do that work every single day. And you have to be able to collaborate professionally around big opportunities to accelerate your ecosystem and have a catalytic effect. And that's what we're seeing with some of the tech hubs work, as well as people who have day jobs, people who run programs, people who are leaders of VSOs and institutions coming together to say this is important for us to do together because it can help us take a giant step forward if and when we win.
What's the biggest hurdle or barrier facing the Equitech vision today, right? It's been 3 years, I think, since you guys started. What are some of the things standing in the way that you're focused on overcoming this year and in years to come?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I always start with, just the fact that conversations around equity, around the racial wealth gap, around, inequitable access and opportunity for women and people of color, those are always hard conversations to have. I always lean into the fact that there is data to support that diverse teams with diverse leadership that come from a more diverse background and perspective that are able to solve challenges and attack problems from different lived experiences. Those companies outperform ones that are homogenous, ones that have a single sort of set of leaders and a workforce. So we can put that aside and recognize that economically, building diverse leaders and teams is an empirical advantage, then we can start there. The second thing is, depending on sort of the culture and the mindset of your ecosystem, it can be challenging to get people to see themselves in an aspiration where more people have opportunity, where more people have access, where more people are building world-class companies, because it naturally tends to, people have that deficit mindset. Well, if they're getting that piece of the pie, then I'm missing out on my piece. And we come from a place of abundance. We believe that more is more. We believe that everyone should have opportunity and equal access to build and grow their companies. The companies that then hit their milestones and outperform will be the ones that make it to that next barrier and that next stage. So that is not an equal process. That is like, hey, do the work, show improve, and you'll hit that milestone. But it's always a challenge when you're talking about issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, because those are such hard topics for us in our country to talk through. But I always say this, like, I am a for better or worse eternal optimist. I'm a glass half full person. I think that there is an opportunity for us to do something very different in Baltimore that's never been done. And I think a lot of people are bullish on how we can grow our economy in an equitable way.
You mentioned this earlier, Corey, but you talked about where Baltimore is positioned, right? Like halfway between DC and Philadelphia. What are some of the things that you are trying to do to sort of increase the connectivity between ecosystems so that the founders you support have more opportunities, not just in Baltimore, but beyond?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, I think it started with the fact that, I have been a member of several different ecosystems in Indianapolis, Indiana, and the Raleigh-Durham area, North Carolina, and as a enterprise sales rep, traveling to places like Atlanta, New York, Chicago, and others, and just sort of learning from different ecosystems what works well there, what if people have similar challenges or opportunities, what have you done to capitalize on those or overcome them? And so it starts with reaching out to our counterparts in other ecosystems, people who have a little bit more experience in building their ecosystems and what they've learned over time, what they would have done differently. Um, and we've got, I think, great aligned partners across this country who are very fascinated and interested in the aspiration of being an Equitech city, who align with that, who want to see more diverse leaders, more diverse companies, more economic opportunities to scale businesses that are coming not just out of institutions, but out of neighborhoods as well. And so we've had conversations with folks from Richmond, from DC, from Philadelphia, from New York, that are interested in sharing their networks and sharing their learnings and learning from our experience and sort of touching base with us to say, I want to know more about that. I want to know more about what you're doing. And so keeping those conversations active, making sure that we're sort of mapping some of the learnings and data that we're gathering about our ecosystem and comparing them to others, making sure that we're leaning into the assets that we have that are unique to Baltimore. And I always say this, and it's probably true for any ecosystem, the biggest and best asset that we have is the people and talent that are here. And so leveraging the people here that are taking risks, that are creating, that are investing, that are being active participants in our tech ecosystem will always be, our sort of first and biggest opportunity to create change. But I think connecting the activity that's happening in DC, Richmond, Philly, New York in particular will do nothing but benefit growth in our region as well.
Looking forward a little bit, Corey, you've mentioned a couple times the EDA Tech Hub opportunity. Um, why why is pursuing that important for the Upsurge Equitech mission?
Yeah. The easy answer is it has been a forcing mechanism for professionalized collaboration across our ecosystem. And again, I say the ecosystem is the Baltimore MSA. So we've had folks from surrounding counties, Towson, Columbia, Anne Arundel, everywhere sort of pouring into this process and making us aware of their resources, making us aware of the leaders in their spaces. We are coming up with integrated solutions and plans to execute workforce development growth, acceleration of startup advancement growth, different key sector focuses that we can really lean into to put Baltimore on the map for as a tech hub. And the truth of the matter is, whether we get the phase 2 designation or not, this is the work that Upsurge and other ecosystem building and entrepreneur support organizations will be doing over the next decade. So the proposal that we're putting together are plans that we need and should intend to execute. The governor has allocated part of his budget to supporting the tech hub and the work that's being done. Many members of our private sector community are coming into alignment around certain activities within the proposal that they're really excited about supporting. So whether or not we get the phase 2 designation is sort of irrelevant. This is the plan. This is how we need to execute for the next 3 to 5 years that will have impact over the next decade in Baltimore, being a leader in the country of equitable economic growth, and being an Equitech city and state and sort of setting the blueprint for what it looks like to grow your tech economy in an equitable way. And so I just invite everyone who is interested in learning more about it. It is the phase 1 proposal is publicly available. The phase 2 proposal will also be publicly available. But if you're active with a corporate partner, a private sector partner, a foundation, an institution, and believe that you want to be engaged in this process, now is the time to commit to it. Now is the time to invest in Baltimore Tech. We've got a ton of momentum, and it's only going to continue from here.
Corey, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really appreciative of your time. Tell the audience how they can connect with you and or with Upsurge if they're interested in learning more.
Yeah, connect with Upsurge through our website, upsurgebaltimore.com. We're active on socials at Upsurge Be More, Instagram and Twitter. Follow us on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn, Corey Bailey, Corey with a K. Follow me on Instagram at Corey Bailey 12. Would love to connect with anyone. And if you are tech curious, you're in the tech space, the easiest way to find your way into being an active participant is to come to Equitech Tuesday, every Tuesday from 6 to 8 p.m. at Guilford Hall Brewery. We'll have a special one out at Baltimore Peninsula on February 6th, where we'll be doing the No Picks After Dark podcast live with Jeff Cherry and Tamira Lucas. And then create a profile and Be More Tech Connect. Start to navigate the resources, people, and assets that are available in Baltimore. And that's baltimore.tech.
Amazing. Thank you, Corey, for being here. And if you're interested in learning more about EcoMap, you can visit our website, ecomap.tech, and you can also find us on all major social channels, EcoMap Tech. Thanks, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you next time. Take care.